In this action-adventure game, the player has been cursed and has been turned into a monkey. They need to explore this abandoned castle in order to find a relic to cure their curse. This was inspired by a time when I personally went to Pendennis Castle in the south of England, but in terms of level design, I realised I didn't have much to work with looking back at pictures of the place. So I used several castles across the country as reference, trying to imagine a layout in them, and learning in detail different parts of a castle to try help create an interesting sequence of events. The biggest thing I realised while doing this is that to make a level based off a castle be immersive, I couldn't quite force a critical path, so the level design had to be open-ended, and that became my design goal, to create an immersive, open-ended experience. The main mechanic of my game is climbing. The player is free to climb on any wall in the level without limits, such as a stamina meter. The player can also wall jump, which can be used in combination with climbing to reach interesting places. There are also coins scattered across the level, sometimes used to guide the player on where to go, and other times used as a reward for completing an optional challenge. What opposes the player is the environment itself. As the castle is abandoned, the level is covered in thorns that make the player stop climbing until they touch the floor again. Next, there are several locked doors in the level that require a key to open. Also, the castle has been eroded away at by the coastline it was built on. The further into the castle you get, the more dismantled it becomes. Lastly, the ridges at the top of the castle walls, called crenellations, cannot be climbed over to prevent the player from going out of bounds. All of this together creates an experience where the player has to read the environment around them to figure out the challenge that they have to overcome. I want to go in depth with how the climbing mechanic works, just because there's a lot of code in this, and I feel like I would be able to break it down adequately. The code centers around 3 line traces being projected in front of the player at head, chest, and foot height, which activate when collided with a wall or already climbing on a wall. When first colliding with a wall, this is done via event hit, and it checks the normal of the hit result just to make sure that it is a wall and not a floor. And then for when the player is already climbing, it's done via event tick. It does show this thing called move assist. We'll get into that later. Once the process begins, this is where the line traces mentioned before take place. Then it goes through this decision tree depending on which of the line traces hit and which of them do not. To visualize this easier, I've made a diagram showing all the possibilities and their results. This goes in order from left to right, so if both the head and chest trace are hitting, then it will decide that the player needs to begin climbing if they haven't already. When the player starts climbing, it sets their movement mode to flying, which may seem a bit confusing, but this is just so the gravity doesn't pull the player downwards. Within the player's base movement, it will have different controls for whether or not they're climbing. Afterwards, it stops the player's velocity just to make sure that they don't slide on the wall when they first begin climbing, and then it will also rotate the player equal to the normal of the collision to make sure that they're climbing in the right direction. Then next are the 3 different types of move assists. A move assist can be done whether climbing or walking. These just help the player get around and are just there for a quality of life. First off, if the chest trace is hitting, but the head trace is not, the player will perform what is called a clamber. This is where they're climbing up a ledge and they get a good boost upwards and then a slight boost forwards onto the platform. Next, if the chest trace is not hitting, but the foot trace is, then the player will perform what is called a vault. This is where they're just on the tip of a ledge and they get a slight boost upwards and then a good boost forwards. The last move assist is called a pull-up, which happens if only the head trace hits. This is for situations where the player is jumping up to walls higher than them and they only just about reach. Here, the player will get a significant boost upwards. And finally, if none of the traces are hitting and the player is currently climbing, then they will stop climbing.